Aloha and welcome to the Human Impact on Ecosystems video. In this video, we will explain how human activities can harm ecosystems. We'll talk a little bit about the greenhouse effect, and we'll describe what introduced species are and their effects on the ecosystem. Now, humans are a unique species on the planet. Every species on the planet is kind of limited by the niche that it fills. Humans are able to redefine the niche that they fill by the use of technology. So we've had a negative impact on the planet because we are living where we don't belong and doing things that we shouldn't be able to do, biologically speaking. So when we look at our negative impacts, we have to look at the impact of growth of the human population. And as we get bigger, what do? We have to make places for us to live. And in doing so, we're destroying native habitats or natural habitats to put in new cities and towns and houses and things of that nature. Now, because we're such a big population, we have the idea of trash. So we actually don't use things straight from the ecosystem. We manufacture, package, do all that kind of stuff. So we have all this trash to get rid of. So that takes up more space that we have to get rid of. But also we have the potential for pollution coming from that trash. We've already hinted at the impact of land development when we talk about building new cities and things of that nature, putting in new roads. And we do that just for our species, and that all has a negative impact on the environment around it. Now, going back to the trash and going to the pollution, we have things like chemical runoff, acid rain. We actually produce more ozone than is necessary, and we should talk about ozone real quickly. Ozone forms a layer in our atmosphere, and the ozone layer is very important. The reason for that is it blocks out this ultraviolet radiation from the sun. It's kind of like the world sunblock. So by having that ozone layer, we're able to have life on the land. If we didn't have that, everything would have to be below the water because the ultraviolet radiation can't penetrate into the water and cause the same damage. So we'd have a lot of skin cancer without the ozone layer. The bad thing is we produce more ozone, it goes up there, it gets a little bit thicker, and ozone is a heavily component of smog. So when you look at the smog in the cities, part of that is the ozone that we're creating. The last thing I want to talk to you about today is going to be this greenhouse effect and what that's all about. And the greenhouse effect is something that's natural. We have it going on the planet. It's kind of like a blanket for the planet. It traps in a little bit of heat so we don't get too cold, and it kind of makes it a little bit harder for it to warm up. So during the daytimes, it works as a buffer system, kind of makes it so that the planet's inhabitable temperature wise. Now, when we talk greenhouse effect, we're going to talk about the gases that do it. The biggest gas that we have out there is water. Water vapor in the atmosphere does most of the greenhouse effect. But there's this other one, carbon dioxide here. And our problem is what we've done since the Industrial Revolution is we put people into cities, and now we have to heat the cities, we have to generate electricity, and most of that's done through fossil fuels. And one of the pollutants, one of the things we release is carbon dioxide into the environment. And because we've been removing habitat and getting rid of forests and things like that, there's no longer the plants to deal with the excess CO2. And that's what we're talking about is this rapid climate change and global warming of the past is what's the effect of this carbon dioxide that we're putting out into the atmosphere. Now, part of the things with humans is we have this idea of introduced species. We're bringing species into places where it wasn't naturally found. And when we do so, one of the things we notice is where it's naturally found, there's a predator that keeps that population in check. But when we put it into someplace new without that predator, those populations are able to bloom and they go crazy. So a couple examples are the kudzu vine that we see now in America. We brought that over from a garden. But when it gets out of a garden, what it does is it'll actually take over and cover the plants with this kudzu vine, and then these plants underneath it starve and die out because they're no longer able to do photosynthesis because they're covered by the leaves of the kudzu vine. Some other examples that we might have heard about are the emerald ash borer, and that one came in wood products. We didn't even know it came, and now it's just going through trees and decimating our forests. And then finally, we have the zebra mussel here that you can see. And the zebra mussel came in inadvertently. It wasn't like somebody said, hey, we should have mussels here. Instead, it came in the ballast tanks of ships. And when they flushed out the ballast tanks, they flushed out these zebra mussels. And because there's nothing that feeds on them, they were able to explode in populations. So when you introduce a species, you might not think anything of it at the time, but because it's not held in check, that population has the chance to bloom and go crazy like we've seen in some of these species. Okay, so that's it for this video. As always, good luck with the lessons, and we'll see you in the next video. Aloha and welcome to the video on conservation biology. For this video, our goals are to define what conservation biology is, describe how people are reducing air and water pollution, and finally to discuss how people are protecting threatened and endangered habitats. So first up, we should define what conservation biology is. And conservation biology uses ecological information to understand how to rescue and restore damaged ecosystems. So recognizing that what the ecosystem should be like, what the impact of humans is, and then how we can restore that and reduce the further impact on those ecosystems. And some of the ways we do that are we control the amount of trash and pollution that we're putting out there. We can start limiting habitat destruction, and we can actually even start creating reserves, which are pockets where we try and preserve that native ecosystem and the wildlife that's associated with there. Okay, so we have a bunch of different issues in the ecosystem that we have to look at. The first one we'll look at is pollution on land. And pollution on land, what we're talking about is trash, and primarily putting it and keeping it in landfills. The problem with that is we're destroying habitats to make these landfills, and then we have to make sure that we're containing all of the trash in there. And one of the ways that we can help this is if we start recycling things like paper, plastic, metals, and things that would go into the trash. If they don't make it that far, if they're reused, then we don't have such the big need for a landfill. The next issue is air quality. And when we're talking about air quality, a lot of it is going to be these waste gases that we're producing as emissions. And some of these gases can get out into the environment. They form with the rain, and what we make acid rain. We can also get rid of some of the ozone, and we saw that ozone was important because that protects us from ultraviolet radiation. And also it can increase the amount of greenhouse gases, and that's one that we're seeing here an awful lot of. So how do we deal with this? Well, we kind of have to agree, and governments have to agree to control the emissions from cars and industries. So if we stop putting the gases out there, then we can recognize the fact that we are changing the atmosphere. And if we recognize that fact, then we can start limiting that change that we're having. Okay, next up we have to talk about water quality. When we're talking about water quality, the big one is this liquid waste from industries and farms called runoff that gets into our fresh water supply. So the best thing we can do there is we can start to regulate this amount of runoff and try and reduce or eliminate it altogether and protect our freshwater supplies. Another issue is land development, and land development is important because as our population grows, we need to have more space, and as we have more space, we're removing trees, and that's leading towards deforestation. We're also destroying natural native habitats. So one of the things we can do is we're noticing now that there's landscape ecology, and what that does is that's going to develop the land with as much of a reduction in the impact on the ecosystem as it possible. So instead of going in and cutting down all the trees, they kind of cut down some of the trees, maintain some of the trees, maintain some of the wooded lands, and they're trying to expand or have our land development but without damaging the ecosystem as much as we have been. Okay, and then finally we have our issue of living things. And one of them is that organisms, if they move out of their natural ecosystems, they have to go somewhere. And sometimes they survive, sometimes they don't, they go extinct, and sometimes we're bringing them from one place, putting them into another as an introduced species. So the best way to deal with that is to try and limit this habitat destruction. So if we don't have a need to move these species and we don't have a pressure on the species, then it's going to be better off for them. We can also protect species this way, and then we start to develop these recovery plans to try and help them heal. So these are a lot of the issues that we're dealing with human impacts in the ecosystem, and they all have things that we can do to make it better. We might not be able to eliminate the issue, but if we can make it better, it'll be better off for us in the long run. One of the hot topics you'll hear a lot about is biodiversity, and that's the amount of different living things, different living species that are out there. And part of that, because of our negative impacts that we've been covering, we can see how we're putting additional pressures on some of these species that they shouldn't have to deal with or wouldn't deal with without us being here. So we've driven several into the threatened range where there's the threat that they could be, if we keep doing what we're doing, eventually they'll become endangered and then ultimately extinct. So threatened means that they're threatened, we're encroaching on their habitat, we're making their life difficult, Endangered means that we really need to step in if we want to try and preserve these species and this biodiversity that we see out there. Okay, so that's it for this video. As always, good luck with the lessons. They'll go into a lot more detail than what we covered in this short video, and we'll see you in the next video. Aloha and welcome to the Science and Technology video. In this video, we will define what technology is, we'll discuss how technology supports science and how science supports technology, and we'll compare the goals of science and technology. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at science and technology and what their differences are. In science, the knowledge is gained from experimentation and observation. What do we see? What can we test? All of that kind of fun stuff that makes it what science is. Now, science's goal is to explain the world around us, and that's kind of important. And some examples of science are heredity, biology, and chemistry. Or we can go down to like the Human Genome Project, where we've tried to find out what all the genes are in human chromosomes. Technology, on the other hand, is the use of this scientific knowledge to make things. So some examples of technology would be computers, atomic energy, gene therapy, and antibiotics, things that have been made using this scientific knowledge. So as we mentioned, the goals of technology and science are going to be a little bit different. The goal of engineers is to design technology to make people's lives better, to solve their problems, to meet their needs and desires. So technology is more people-oriented. How can we make your life better? It's more in people. People are affected by technology a little bit more. The goal of science is to understand the natural world so we can explain what's going on and predict what might happen. So what happens is we start off with science. Okay, and then science is going to give us new knowledge. That science is going to go help technology. So that new knowledge will form a new technology. Now that new technology might allow us to do better science, which gives us more knowledge, which allows us to improve technology. So we can see how it's this cycle that goes through, and this technology has an offshoot where it helps us, it helps people. So that's what we're looking at here. When we talk about the goals, science wants to explore the world, technology wants to use that knowledge to create things to make our lives a little better. And that's the difference between the two. Okay, short video this time. It's a pretty easy lesson. Good luck on the lessons while you complete them, and we'll see you in the next video.